Within the last few years, we have seen the U.S. government take a hard stance on stopping illegal immigration and increasing border control. We have seen an increase in deportation and heard talks of building a wall on the U.S.-Mexico border. We have witnessed immigrant parents being separated from their children as part of our deportation process. With the current negative rhetoric for immigrants currently circulating around the United States, it is perhaps important that we look back on our country's history with immigrants from Mexico. Let us discuss an important past event called Operation Wetback. In 1954, under the Eisenhower administration, Operation Wetback was initiated. It was a government-funded mass deportation that targeted undocumented Mexican workers in the United States. It was the largest mass deportation in United States history and second mass deportation of Mexicans specifically. The expression wetback had originated as a term that was used to describe Mexicans who illegally entered Texas by crossing the Rio Grande River. Over time, it became less of a term and more of a racial insult. So how did the United States amass so many Mexican workers in the first place? Well, you might be surprised to hear that the majority of them entered the United States legally and were in fact invited by its government. In 1942, the U.S. was in need of labor, and it looked to Mexico as its source. It created the United States Mexican Farm Labor Program, also known as Operation Bracero. The program transported willing Mexicans into the United States on a temporary basis, in exchange for guaranteed wages, humane treatment, and safe working conditions. It's estimated that 4.6 million Mexicans entered the country legally through this program up until its discontinuation in 1964. But with an increase in Mexicans within the country, so was there an increase in the discrimination against them. Border states like Texas presented the worst of it. The anti-Mexican sentiment was so heavy there that they were excluded from the program between 1942 and 1947. Race-based hate crimes against Mexicans were high in numbers there, and some businesses even openly refused to serve them. In 1954, Harlan B. Carter was the head of the U.S. Border Patrol in the southwestern sector of the United States. He was known to have more than just a dislike for Mexicans. In fact, some may have called him a racist. In 1931, he killed a Mexican-American teen named Romano Casiano in Texas for hanging out in front of his house. Carter was only 17 at the time. He was convicted of the killing, however, it was later overturned on a procedural technicality. This is the man who would first bring up the idea of mass deportation to President Eisenhower. He did so in the form of a plan he called Operation Coldburst. Eisenhower had seriously considered his proposal, but had to reject it because it called for military use in domestic law enforcement, which was prohibited. Eisenhower appointed Joseph Swing to head the Immigration and Naturalization Service. In May of 1954, together, Swing and Carter issued a press statement announcing Operation Wetback. In a statement made to the New York Times, Carter said they would soon unleash an all-out war to hurl Mexican wetbacks back into Mexico. After the operation launched, U.S. Border Patrol agents descended heavily on border towns and even entered some cities inland, showing up unannounced at farms, ranches, and factories. They hit all the parks, hotels, restaurants, train and bus stations in and around the areas of these towns. Agents raided Mexican American communities and used low-flying planes to search arid landscapes for illegal Mexicans. Their goal was to deport as many Mexicans as possible in the quickest way possible. Airplanes, boats, buses, and trains were all used to transport these people that were being deported to Mexico. Most times, they were crammed into these vessels and dropped off at the border without food or water. The heat would sometimes reach temperatures of over 100 degrees in some of these drop-off areas, and these people were left to fend for themselves. Families were detained and separated, not knowing if they would even be sent to the same point of entry into Mexico with each other. Deaths did take place in the process. However, the U.S. government downplayed the numbers and didn't want to take the responsibility of any of them at all. In one instance, an overpacked ship sailing through the Gulf of Mexico caused 37 immigrants to jump overboard. 5 of them drowned. In some cases, Mexican American citizens were rounded up in the chaos and shipped to Mexico, left to find their own way back to their homes in the United States. Operation Wetback didn't last long because it quickly ran out of funding. In 1956, during Senate testimony about the operation itself, it was said that the effort was accomplished skillfully and quickly, and that the border was almost wholly relieved of its wetback problem. However, this was not the case. Operation Bracero had given industries a taste of cheap labor that they relied on. The deportation of their workers that had legally entered the country with the program only caused these industries to seek the help they needed from immigrants that entered illegally. Operation Wetback was a failed plan based on racist incentives that only ended up increasing the number of undocumented workers in the U.S. and further circulating negative Mexican stereotypes around the country. We can still hear this negative rhetoric about Mexicans in the United States today. Many Americans are starting to spout the same false narratives that were given over 60 years ago that helped lead to mass deportation. It's often said that history is cyclical. But should we really let history repeat itself in this case? Or can we even help it?